So what we are trying to achieve here, mini class, is we're trying to achieve this effect with the Bored Ape Yacht Club thing. So we're gonna mess with a GIF, a container, and we're gonna add some hover effects too. First things first, let me find my editor X. I'm gonna make our container just a fixed width for right now. I think I might actually do 500 pixels. 500 pixels height and width. And I am going to select our GIF, and I'm going to just go to our layers here. And I'm going to Control X, our GIF. I'm gonna go to our container that we just made and Control V, there we go. So now we can see in our layers, we have our container and our image inside, but the image too big for the container. Super easy to fix. Our container is 500 pixels width, 500 pixels height. I don't want a minimum height. We're just gonna set that to none. So I want our container to dictate all of the height of the assets inside of it. So our image, we're going to set the minimum height to none. The height will be auto, or we could just set this to 100%. Doesn't really matter. And the width, I'm gonna set this to 100%. So what this does, and let's see if it actually, okay. So all we need to do is it's docked and has a negative 54 margin. We want this set to 0. Let's undock this. If you guys can see, there's a little bit of like gray behind there, and that's just the container color. So I'm gonna go to my inspector again, design, turn the opacity down, and we just have the GIF at 500 by 500. Okay, cool, but how do we get an image and only when I hover, it shows the GIF? So let's do that. I'm gonna select my container here. I'm gonna select these 3 dots, and I'm going to quick add another container. And all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the width and the height to 100%. Reason being is because I want the container to fill the full width of our main container. I'm actually gonna rename this and just call it our main container. So we have our main container, we're gonna call this our overlay container, and we just have our GIF here. So I'm going to change the color. Again, in my inspector, I'm selecting our overlay container here, going to our design tab, background color, and we are just going to add a color. All right, there we go. Okay, I want to pull it away from the background. So we'll switch this to, we'll just do a light bluish gray for right now, so you guys can see kind of what's happening. So our container, I do see some weird lines here, so I want to make sure that there's no margin. This is some of the troubleshooting. Yep, I don't want any min height too. Just want to remove that. Just doing some of the troubleshooting, making sure that this container, this overlay container, is like centered horizontally and vertically in our main container. And I do want to add, let's just, just for shits and giggles, let's just steal this Bored Ape Yacht Club thing. And let's also put that on top. So I'm gonna go to my media, upload. All right, there we go, add to page. And we will just shrink this. I want to make sure that this image, even though I dragged it in here, I wanna make sure that it's actually in our hierarchy, that it's inside of our container. We don't want it inside of our overlay container. We actually just want it to be another item in our main container. This image that we pulled in here was inside of the overlay container. But if we animate the overlay container, it will affect our Bored Ape Yacht Club logo, which we don't want. So we want it to be outside of that group essentially. So we Control X to pull it out, and we just have it to be its own item inside of our main container. So what we want to do now, I'm also gonna I'm gonna add some of our text. So main container, selecting that, 3 dots, quick add. We are going to we'll just do a title for now. We're going to make it edit text. We're gonna set it to white. We'll just call it node. Maybe we'll do all caps. Let's just rock with that. Okay, so we got node. Let's kill the font size just a little bit. And there's all this space that I don't really care for. So I'm gonna go to, again, the inspector panel. It says 38%, don't care about that. I want the box to be exactly the same size as our text. I just go ahead and go here, click in, max content, and it just automatically does the math for me and says node is this big, we're just going to make the bounding box the size of the text. So perfect. And I'm just going to make sure this is docked to the left and the right of that container. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to bring it to this side, and we'll just say discover, whatever. Perfect. And it's got max content. Awesome. And I want to make sure that it is the same percentage from, so we want 3.6%. Okay. Just making sure that the same space on the left is the same space on the right over here for this. All right, now let's get the rounded corners. So I'm going to select my overlay container here. That's our, or our main container. And you know what? I think this is something I think a couple of us have been trying to work through, the corners. So I'm gonna give all of this, I'm gonna go to corners, we're gonna do 30 pixels. There we go. Main container, corners, 30 pixels. And it applies to all of them, so I only gotta do it once. So now what we're gonna do is I think this is in a good spot. We have all of our hierarchy, our architecture is in a good spot. So I'm just gonna set this to the center horizontally and vertically. Cool. And let's do, all right, so the first thing I want to do, these two pieces, just like in this here, they're not there yet. They only show up on hover. So let's go ahead and set that first. So first things first is I'm gonna go to our main container, and I'm gonna go to my inspector, and I want to go to the overflow content. Right now it's on show, meaning anything that is inside of this bounding box will be shown. Anything on the outside will be hidden. So if I take this discover and I just push this up, we can still see it. But I'm gonna Control Z that. If I go to my main container, go to hide, go back to discover, and I push this up, you can't see it anymore. So I'm going to select our main container here. I'm going to go to this beta interaction section, and I'm going to start creating triggers and effects. So the trigger that we want is when we hover over our main container, we want certain things to happen. So I'm going to select hover. I'm going to affect our main container and the things inside of it. So I'm just going to leave it here. We want to apply an effect, and there are preset effects, but we're going to create a custom one. And so now what I can do is I can manipulate really what we're designing. So right now we're designing the hover effect, and there's also in this drop down the initial state. So the initial state is basically the before, the hover effect is basically the after, what you want your element to look like when it's hovered. So let's go ahead and design this. What we want to happen is this image, we want the opacity to be brought to 0. The node and discover will actually stay here. We'll change the initial state so that they're hidden in the beginning. This overlay container, we want the opacity to change to 0. So now that the GIF is showing. And another thing that we actually have to fix is if you see here the discover and node, they are actually inside of the overlay container, which was the mistake that I was trying to avoid in the first place, where if we tried to reduce the opacity, we were reducing the opacity of everything else in there. So I'm going to hit done very quickly, and I'm going to pull discover and node out, selecting both, holding shift, Control X, going to main container, Control V, it pulls them back in here, and I'm just going to use my arrow keys to kind of put them back in place. Okay, they're both still docked, perfect. All right, so let's go back to our, we have our hover and we have our effect in here. We want to go back to editing our effect. So we're going to go from triggers to effects, and we're going to edit the hover effect here, going back to where we were. Okay, so here our node and our discover are still here, but maybe, you know, it's kind of hard to read. So maybe we'll go back to our overlay container, and maybe we, instead of the opacity being 0%, maybe we go to like 5 or something where there's still a little bit of an overlay, but we can kind of read this. Maybe we'll do 10 or 15, something like that. And of course you can use your own discretion, your own eye, etc. So now we've designed our hover effect. Let's go to the initial state, and let's move these puppies out of view. So I'm selecting my node here, and I can either drag them up, right? Just like this, But essentially what happened is I moved right here. I translated that text up by negative 71 pixels. So I can either move it with my mouse manually or just type in the percentage or the pixel amount or percentage or whatever that I want. So discover, I'm gonna do the same thing, negative 70. And now let's take a peek at what this looks like. Ooh, all right, there we go. Ta-da. Now let me see. Yeah, this was a pretty quick. So if you want something quick like this, where there's not so much of a fade, and it happens like instantly, what you can do is go back to the effects. So I'm going to do main container, go back to my effects, hover effect, and each one of these, we can see here, there's a timing and there's also an easing. You can reduce obviously the animation here from like 0 to 0.3 seconds. You can reduce this to like 0.1, but you want to make sure that you select the correct thing. So this image is our Bored Ape Yacht Club, so we want to set this also to just a linear animation. Our container, we want to set this to a linear animation, and let's see what this looks like. There's still a little bit of a fade. We're going to reduce some of the timing, or maybe we even set it to 0, 0.1. Let's hit done. Let's go to preview. So a little bit faster. Now there is like a very interesting like bounding box. Let's go to initial state, and we're going to do kind of the same changes here for the image and our overlay container. So linear, and we're going to set the end to be 0.1, so those animations happen a little bit faster. Yeah, I wonder. Let me do this. I'm going to hide this really quick. Don't display. Yeah, it just must be the asset. I need to add a button because we want to make it clickable. How this works, Liz, you want to go to your main container, and what you're going to do is you're going to click these 3 dots. You're going to quick add a button, and you are going to set this to be, let's take this off, no minimum height. We're going to do a width of 100% so it fills the container. And the minimum height, we're actually just going to set that to 100 so it fills the entire thing. And now all we're going to do is we're going to go to the design, the background, we're going to set that to 0% so it's like see-through. And the text, we're just going to delete it, hit enter, preview. And now we have to change the hover of it. Let's select our button. We need to change the hover. So we also need to change the background of this, set it to 0. Let's actually link it to something. So link, where do we want it to go? We'll just do google.com. We'll put it in a new window, hit done, preview. We have our hover effect. Click, and we've got google.com. So that's it. But if I did have a cleaner PNG, it wouldn't be doing that weird, where there's like this weird gray. If you guys see that, like if we swap this out, we just do edit site. What if we just put this preview? Yeah, we don't get those weird artifacts. It's a little bit smoother. Yeah, guys, that's how it's done. That is how you get your nice little hover animation, just like with the Bored Ape Yacht Club's things, or this Yugo or whatnot. That's how it's done. I hope you guys liked this episode. If you did, you can find more build from scratch website tutorials with me right here, or you can find more Editor X tips and tricks in this playlist over here. With that said, I hope to see you guys in another video. And of course, if you liked this episode and what we're doing here on this channel, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.